Every time you hear the phrase "studies show," you're trusting a claim that has roughly a coin flip's chance of actually holding up once someone checks the math behind it. Not because science is broken, because almost nobody ever gets to check it. Think about the last time you repeated a fact from a headline. Maybe it was about relationships, or productivity, or why sociologists say friend groups shrink as people age. You picked it up, you believed it, you probably passed it along to someone else. But a published finding works a lot like a recipe card. It tells you the dish came out great, but it almost never comes with the ingredient list or the actual cooking instructions behind it. Without those, nobody else can walk into their own kitchen and check whether the dish really turns out the way the card promised. A massive new look at the social and behavioral sciences just tried to pry open those kitchens, and what it found should change how you hear the words "studies show" from now on. Researchers publishing in the journal Nature in 2026 didn't just spot-check a handful of papers. They pulled from 62 of the most prominent journals across 6 entire fields: business, education, psychology, economics, political science, and sociology. Their first question was simple. When a study claims something, does anyone else actually get to see the raw data and the analysis code behind it? The pantry, in other words. Because that's really what data and code are: the ingredients and the exact instructions a researcher used to cook up their conclusion. Across all 62 journals, only about 1 in 5 papers, roughly 20%, made that pantry available to anyone at all. 4 out of 5 kitchens stayed locked, the door shut, the recipe kept private. The finding, the headline, the claim you might repeat at dinner, existed entirely on faith. Nobody outside the original research team could check whether the numbers actually added up the way they were reported, and there's no dramatic villain here either. Journals rarely required it. Careers get built on new results rather than double-checked ones, and sharing a messy folder of raw analysis files has never been anyone's favorite Friday afternoon task. This entire project sits inside a growing corner of science sometimes called metascience, the science of science, where researchers turn the same careful tools they'd use to study the world onto their own field's published record instead. And it's worth being precise about what that record checking actually involved. This wasn't a team running brand new experiments to see if people behaved the same way twice. It was narrower, and in some ways, more damning than that. They took the exact same numbers the original authors already collected and simply asked whether the math checked out. No new participants, no new surveys, no new opportunity for the world to have changed in between. Just the original ingredients, recombined the exact same way to see if the same dish came out. So the team did what almost nobody bothers to do. They walked into the 20% of kitchens that were actually open. They took the public data, the exact ingredients the original authors used, and reran the exact same recipe, the same statistical steps, on the same numbers to see if they landed in the same place. Here's where it gets uncomfortable. Only 50% of those claims came out precisely the same, matching the original numbers exactly. Another 25% came out approximately right, close in the same direction, but not matching. The equivalent of a study claiming a habit boosts memory by 20%, and the recheck finding a real but smaller bump instead. And the final 25% simply failed. Different numbers, sometimes no meaningful finding at all, where the original paper had confidently claimed one. Most of this almost certainly isn't researchers cheating. It's coding slips, a mislabeled spreadsheet column, a rounding difference, a software default that quietly shifts from one computer to the next. Small kitchen mistakes, invisible from the outside, that change what actually comes out of the oven. A single misplaced decimal point, a variable pulled from the wrong column, a statistical test run on a slightly different slice of the sample than the paper described, and a claim that looked rock solid on the page quietly stops holding up the moment somebody else turns the same oven back on. Not every field burned equally. Business research reproduced the most reliably, sitting near the top of the 6 fields checked. Education and psychology followed reasonably close behind. Economics and political science landed further down the shelf. And sociology, the field behind so many of the headlines about relationships, communities, and social trends, came out worst of all. Only about 25% of sociology's published claims could be precisely reproduced from their own publicly shared data. Picture the 6 fields lined up on a shelf, from the sturdiest recipe box to the one held together with tape. That quote you've seen passed around online, something like quality relationships improve your well-being, or community involvement predicts happiness, statistically has a real chance of coming from exactly this shakier end of the shelf. So does the productivity hack you saw credited to a business study, or the study method advice pulled from an education journal. They didn't all come from the same reliability, even though the headline treats them identically. 6 fields, 6 very different odds, and the only way to know which shelf a claim came from is to go looking for the recipe yourself, which almost nobody watching the headline scroll by ever actually does. Here's the detail that should really sit with you. Before this study, the obvious assumption was that the crisis in social science was mostly a secrecy problem, that researchers just needed to open their kitchens and hand over the recipe. And sure, 80% of them never did. But look again at the 20% who did everything right. Full transparency, public data, public code. Anyone could walk in and check the work. And even there, the coin flip held. Half the dishes matched. A quarter came out close. A quarter simply didn't work. Handing someone the exact recipe doesn't guarantee they'll bake the same cake, and it turns out handing someone the exact data doesn't guarantee the same result either. The problem was never only about hiding the kitchen. Even in a fully open one, a single wrong ingredient measurement is enough to change what comes out of the oven. Business research held up best of the 6 fields checked. Sociology held up least, with only about a quarter of its claims surviving an exact recheck. That gap doesn't mean social science is fake. It means the field is doing something science is supposed to do, catching its own mistakes instead of quietly filing them away. More journals are now requiring open data and code before they'll even publish a paper, exactly the kind of check that made this whole reanalysis possible in the first place. The kitchens are slowly being forced open. Next time you hear "studies show," you've got a reason to ask whether anyone ever actually checked the recipe.